morning, everyone. Our topic for today is all about social function of language. Again, what is the lecture all about? The lecture is all about language and its function. At the end of discussion, the students were able to define language, define its function, identify the language function processing, identify the aspect of language function, general or micro, meta or macro. Language, an abstract system of symbols and meanings. Language is a purely human and non-instinctive method of communicating ideas, emotion, and desires by means of that voluntarily produced symbols. The method of human communication, either spoken or written, consisting of the use of words in a structured and conventional way. An example of language is words spoken, words read in a book, and people using their hands to express themselves. The word function is often used in different senses in literature of linguistics. In sociological studies of language, function is often used to refer to the role of language plays in society. In ethnography, scholars use function to refer three specific uses of language. In systemic functional linguistics, function of language are highly generalized categories of meaning which simultaneously underlie utterance. A language function explains why someone says something. For example, if you are teaching a class, you will have to use instructions. Giving instruction is the language function. Language function then requires certain grammar. Language function is processed socially when individuals make use of their tongue for interaction. Biologically, much of the language function is processed in several association areas, and there are two well-identified areas that are considered vital for human communication: Wernicke area and Broca area. In other words, language processing is an intricate cognitive function that appears to be sensitive to different sorts of information. Some is linguistic, some is not. In the history of linguistics, we find many renowned personalities who work on language function, but some of the prominent are Roman Jakobson, Bronislaw Malinowski, Michael Halliday, and Finch. We can study language function in two aspects. Number one, general or micro aspect. Number two, meta or macro aspect.
Language function has two aspects. The first one is microfunction, which refers to a specific individual uses or the smallest possible communicative unit. Microfunction are those which help us to identify name, things, record, release emotional energy, communicate, socialize, think, and enjoy through language. These are further categorized as follows: physiological function, empathic function, recording function, identifying function, reasoning function, communicating function, and pleasure function. Physiological function. This is emotive or expressive function, releasing a physical and nervous energy, such as our expression of fear, affection, surprise, or our involuntarily verbal reaction to beautiful things. According to Finch's instruction, it allows us to release our inner feelings. A great deal so-called bad language or swearing fulfill this function as well. Physiological function is the releasing of physical and nervous energy. Although it might be striking, this use of language is fairly common. When we are watching our favorite sports like NBA and other sports, most of us are shouting instructions, expressing our supports or disappointment, and while as a means of communicating with sportsmen, these are useless. Similarly, curse words are used to serve this purpose, as they rarely convey any meaning and are only to make the speaker feel better. Anyone here who wants to say an example of a curse words? Just kidding, we might get in trouble if we give an example of that. The next one is phatic function. It is coined from Malinowski. It is expressing our willingness to be sociable. It helps us to negotiate the start and end of exchange whether in spoken or written form. Phatic function is used to establish a social connection without really communicating any meaningful information. This type of language is used to start or stop a conversation or to check the connection between the sender and the receiver. Some of these are, how are you, I'm fine, and see you later. Imagine spending an entire day without making a small talk with your family members. Answering your phone with the word hello, telling someone to have a nice day, or discussing the weather with a new client. The cliché, phrases, and the time-worn conversation starters are perfect examples of phatic communication. The third one is recording function. Denotes using language to make a durable record of things that ought to be remembered. The most significant function behind the development of language from being an oral medium to becoming a written one. It might be a short-term record as in shopping list or a list of things to do, or a long-term record as in a diary or a history of some sort. Owing to its omnipresence, writing is probably the most significant function of language. There is evidence that the first writing system was developed in the Middle East as early as 4000 BC. At the beginning, writing system took forms of picture representing the things they referred to, gradually developing into the alphabets in their present time. The next one will be identifying function. It allows us to identify an enormous array of objects and errands with considerable precision. It is quick and accurate reference. It is also helpful in proper arrangement. We use names to classify different types of things, whether we call a car an automobile, a lorry, a van, or a truck. That all makes a big difference. Language is also used to identify the objects and events in this world we live in. Without this function, language would be almost useless as it is. Thanks to the names of things that we know, what are the things that we are talking about. Many primitive societies unable to believe that names hold a great power. Even in Western culture, names are thought to be immensely important. The God's name ought not to be used in vain. Before giving a newborn child, the parents consider that choice deeply. We use names to classify different types of things. Like in the first example, the example there is the car. We use so many words to describe cars like truck, a van, an automobile, and a lorry. The next one will be the communicating function. Referential or prepositional function, we use language to express ourselves to others. We also need language in order to understand what they are communicating to us. Requesting, apologizing, informing, ordering, as well as promising and refusing are all reasons to communicating our ideas. Communication is the process of exchanging message, ideas, facts, opinions, or feelings. The function of communication in an organization are to inform, persuade, and motivate. An important communicative function is being able to answer and ask a variety of different questions. Yes, no, who, what, where, when, why, and how are all types of a question that help people ask and answer in everyday activities to gain or provide more information. Example of this is a friend asks, how old are you? The last one will be allows us to derive pleasure from it. Large part of pleasure we derive from language comes from the successful exploitation of linguistics novelty at different levels of language. For example, language often gives pleasure both to the speaker and listeners, supported by the frequent use of assonance, alliteration, and onomatopoeia in poetry. The pleasure resulting from doing something well that motivates people to do their best at a task even when there is no other rewards. Language has musical qualities which gives us the pleasure. Like for example, if we listen to music and we enjoy listening to it, that is the pleasure that is given to us by the language. And that's it for the microfunction of language. Now we were about to go in the next one, which is the meta or macro function. Meta or macro function. The term meta function originates in systematic functional linguistics. It is considered to be a property of all linguistics. A function which is capable of describing one or more other function. In general, a macro language function processes one or more arguments and produces a result. Michael Halliday, the founder of systematic functional linguistics, calls these three functions ideational, interpersonal, and textual.
Hi everyone, so as what Mr. Cañedo said, I will be discussing the ideational, interpersonal, and textual functions by Michael Halliday. Let's start with ideational function. Ideational function. The content function of language and allows us to conceptualize the world for our own benefit and that of others. It is also a language as a coding system which deals with the relation between man and nature. The ideational function is to express our experiences of the both physical and mental world. In this section, we focus on the language used to convey the speaker or writer's perspective on an experience of what is happening. Whenever we talk about events, we represent them in a certain way. There are almost always other choices we could make in our language, which would result in a different representation of events. For example, the event represented in this image, this could be expressed verbally in different ways. For example, 1. A young woman is photographing her brother. 2. A young man is posing for a photograph. Here, we can see a difference in lexical choices. Brother as against young man, for example, and also a difference in the way the grammatical pattern represents the experience. In example 1, we have process in which two participants are involved, one that does the action, the young woman, and one that is affected by the action, her brother. In the clause in example 2, we have a different process involving any participant. The agent, a young man, the man is represented in example 1 as the participant who is acted on, in example 2 as the agent. So, the ideational function is further divided into two. 1. The experiential function and 2. The logical function. Let's proceed to the experiential function. Experiential function. The experiential function refers to the grammatical choices that enable speakers to make meanings about the world around us and inside us. It is through this process of humans making meaning from experience that language evolves. Technically, the function of language Logical functions are used in spreadsheets to test whether a situation is true or false. Depending on the result of the test, you can then elect to do one thing or another. Logical functions provides decision-making tools for information in a spreadsheet. They allow you to look at the contents of the cell, or to perform a calculation and then test that result against a required figure or value. For example, the logical test C7 equals 25 read as if the value in the cell C7 is equal to 25 can be either true or false depending on the value that is entered into cell C7. In addition, a speaker chooses some meaning relation in the process of joining or binding clauses together. The logical function divided into two, the interpersonal function and the textual function. Let's discuss the interpersonal function. Interpersonal function. It is the participatory function of language. Language serves as a medium between individuals. We use language to interact with others, to establish and maintain relations with them, to please them, to anger them, and influence their behavior to get their help or sympathy. The interpersonal functions refers to the grammatical choices that enable a speaker to enact their complex and diverse interpersonal relations. This is based on the claim that the speaker not only talks about something but is always talking to and with others. For example, communication between independent people, such as a son and his father, an employer, an employee, two sisters, a teacher and a student, two lovers, two friends, and so on. Let's proceed to the textual function. Textual function. The relation of language to the verbal and non-verbal situational environment. When language is in use, playing to the previous meta functions and naturally forms the text. Language as a system organizes messages in a unified manner so that chunks of messages fit logically with other around them and with the wider context in which the talking or writing takes place. Textual functions has the ability to organize messages according to context of use to create cohesive text. Textual function is that part of the meaning potential which makes a text into a text, as opposed to a simple string of words or clauses. Textual function serves to create text through various linking devices. For example, the uses of conjunctions and vertical forms of responses such as yes, well, and etc. Functions of Language is an international journal of linguistics which explores the functionalist perspective on the organization and use of natural language. Language affords human beings the ability to communicate anything they can imagine. As a tool, language is infinitely flexible and can be put to multiple purposes. Functions of language promotes the constructive interaction between linguistics and such neighboring disciplines as sociology, cultural studies, psychology, ethology, communication studies, translation theory, and educational linguistics. A language function explains why someone says something. For example, if you are teaching a class, you'll have to give instructions. Giving instructions is the language function. Language function then requires certain grammar. To use our example, giving instructions requires the use of the imperative. A language function refers to what students do with language as they engage with content and interact with others. Function represents the active use of language for a specific purpose. Students use language functions in order to express ideas, communicate with others, and show understanding of content in our academic setting. That's it. And that's the end of my report. Thank you.